Guys, so welcome to Barkeep class, History of Bartending Part 2. So we did yesterday the first one. Again, we're gonna thank Alex and Vlad for making for trying to make the class happen. Unfortunately, we had to postpone for some better time, but as of now, the time that we're now, we might as well make, like I said, something good out of it, and maybe distract ourselves, or like hear something new or get something new. Obviously, I want to thank everybody that kind of had an input here, Lisa as well. So thank you guys for the passion and the creativity behind it, and I hope you guys enjoy the second class as the first one. So we're just gonna touch base on the first one. Basically, whoever missed or is still tuning in. The first class was basically about how the Ottoman Empire spread and how the tavern and the life of tavern began, and after that how the 17th century Europe took over the life of the tavern, and how the life of the tavern was in the beginning obviously a resting place for merchant sailors, merchant people, salesmen, tradesmen, also soldiers traveling. Basically just drinking coffee. It's a very simple establishment with a couple of mugs and so on and so forth, nothing too fancy. Obviously entertainment came in later on with saloons and beer gardens. So basically after that we touched base on the whole history of the growth of the tavern, and then we touched base a bit of sugar. We touched base on Marco Polo's writing in the 13th century, and that's where we stopped from yesterday, so that's where we're going to continue today. So as I said, we're at Swizzle Rum Bar and Drinkery, so it's a blessing that we can still be at our bar. Probably, I'm assuming not for too long, but while we can, it's great to be here. So that's why this class is so crucial, because we're going to touch base on why we basically did this bar that we're doing here. It's a pre-colonial rum tavern themed bar, cocktail bar that is also a hidden bar. Some say speakeasy as well. So we kind of intertwined the whole historic notion of rum into this bar, which we have operating 6 months yesterday ago or something like that. So we didn't do a post yet. We will. So things are good. Yes, in that matter. Anyways, so we're gonna start off. I'm sure we have more people on the chat, so we can go. So basically, before we go into sugar and what it all was and how it came to be about in our area here and Europe and East, we're gonna touch base on people. So basically, throughout history and throughout generations, people liked sweet. It was just a taste buds that it just draws us, till this day. Different forms, of course. So basically, before sugar came to be about, we were eating either dates or figs, or the most popular sweetener there was honey. So honey was one of the most popular sweeteners we had, and that goes a while back. So like in the Aranya caves in Spain, like 12,000 years old, you can see paintings of human beings gathering honey. So honey was a big part of our culture, of the human culture. And so sugar was naturally introduced, and we're gonna see how it was introduced and why this whole vision of incorporates not just into history of bartending, but into the history of US, and into why we decided to do the bar that we did here and why that is going into effect. So sugarcane, obviously, as we know, it requires humidity and a certain type of temperature, a lot of water to grow. So the Pacific Islands were its natural habitat. You can say like Malaysia, places like that. So that's where it started to go. Polynesia as well, right? So that's where it was growing, and then obviously throughout the trade and throughout traveling and throughout mixture of people and gatherings, did sugar grow into what it is now and came to Caribbean and then obviously to the States, right? So we're gonna touch base that today. We're very passionate about rum, so this is a great topic, and I'm very happy we can have it here. So basically, what people believe is 300 BC. What some sources say, or some people believe, is that Alexander the Great brought it into the region of his empire. So that's what the wording is. Obviously, the Arabs brought it into the Mediterranean, and that's how it came into Europe. So Alexander the Great, Nearchos was one of his voyagers, also soldiers, and he would say that the Pacific grass or tree produces sweetness without the bees. So that's how they were introduced to it. Obviously, as we mentioned before, Marco Polo in the 13th century wrote about sugar wine. So people were drinking sugar wine in the East. So it was all kind of this, regions starting to understand regions and getting to know regions by battles, by conquerors, or just by tradesmen. So it was like this massive interaction between everybody in the whole area, and that's what it was going about. So that's why history of sugar or sugarcane is very important to know. So as we said, how it traveled through the biggest. So basically in Europe, where it can grow due to a climate, because it requires really good climate besides Caribbean, is basically Portugal, Spain, and Madeira. So basically those are, let's say, the three countries that sugarcane would do good in. We're going to touch base presence of Brazil, Mexico, just some of the countries, of course, East Asia are great producers of sugarcane. Caribbean we don't even have to mention, but Caribbean are a great producer of sugarcane as well. So basically, as we can see from how it started from a little bit to a lot. Basically, who was thankful for the sugarcane coming into America was Christopher Columbus, as a lot of people know, on his second voyage, which was at 1493. So on his second voyage to Hispaniola, Haiti, in the minute, the sugarcane arrived. Sugarcane, let me just backtrack. Sugarcane, when it was in Europe, it didn't pick up so much at the time. It took a while for sugarcane to pick up, to be produced into sugar, of course. And once it did, it was mostly for the wealthy. So the poorer people, or the less fortunate, or the less wealthy people, were still consuming figs, dates, and whatever, if they could, of course. So basically, sugar. It took a while for sugar to make that expansion. To go back to Christopher Columbus, why he was so fortunate to do that is because his mother-in-law, they had sugarcane fields in Madeira, and they were also in the business. So he kind of understood. His father-in-law. So he kind of understood the whole process of things and how it required. Obviously, he got the funding to explore. Obviously, he thought he was gonna go to India, but what happened was, as he came, so did the sugarcane come, and so did the whole history started to go about, right? A lot of people call sugar the white gold, as it was. So basically, a lot of people are convinced that sugarcane or sugar was the booster of colonial spread, and basically colonization of greater powers. Of course, at the time, the greatest powers were Spain, the Dutch, English, French, and Portuguese. So they were one of the biggest powers at the time. What they were doing is it was a lot of things going on, and why we're mentioning all these things is so like people can understand at the saloon and taverns what the bartender or barkeep in what present time he was dealing with, what he was doing, because it wasn't just about the sugar and the monopoly of sugar and becoming more important than in that industry and profiting so much from that industry. It was also like the spice trade, like the monopoly of the spice trade at the East. That there are a lot of things going on that were battling for basically the power of the empire that wanted to be the strongest, right? So we're gonna go how that whole transition with Columbus. So basically, obviously, the Spanish were helping Columbus. The Portuguese had a big interest in Brazil. Brazil was also a great sugarcane producer, but the Dutch kicked out Portuguese. So there was a big, massive influence of the Dutch in Brazil as well at that time. So as you can see, there were a lot of battles. It was a very politically unsecure time. So it was very difficult for everybody, especially for people that were just working day to day, right? Because you could never know what was going to happen. As that all went by, as that all improved, Barbados started to be picking up as the main economic of the sugarcane world, or the sugar. So basically, it was the second richest colony of the British, and basically it was the golden era at the time at Barbados. So everybody was seeing Barbados at the 17th century as one of the most wealthiest countries due to this. At the time, obviously, whoever was poor in Great Britain, English, doesn't matter if you were English, Irish, Scottish, people were looking for a better place to live. So basically, at the time, so keep in mind, this time they were talking about, this is the beginning of plantations, right? So it wasn't, the rum game didn't develop yet. So people that had nothing, they were enrolling, like around 30,000 people in the beginning enrolled to work at the plantations. What the deal was at the time is you would work in the plantation for 3 to 9 years. So for 3 to 9 years, you would be obligated, we got 10 more minutes? Okay. So from 3 to 9 years, you would be obligated to pay your debt to the plantation owner on the plantation, and after that time, you would gain a piece of land. So a lot of young people looking for something new, looking for a better life, did that. The only thing that they didn't know is the chances of you making was very little to none, because obviously coming from Europe, it's a totally different climate. The Caribbeans were very, very, very harsh on the bodies that were not accustomed to that environment. So basically, a lot of people were dying from malaria, from all kinds of diseases, insects, mosquitoes, everything, fevers. So it wasn't that of a easy life for those people as well. But whoever got into the rum business in the beginning definitely prospered the most. How that went about is after Barbados was basically settled with the single estate family owners working, then you would have smaller estate owners that were actually kind of trying to make it in that whole environment. But basically the big owners, so the big plantation owners, were basically running the show. What it was at the time, they were in the governing body and so on and so forth. So basically, smaller producers and the people that just came to work there were just like struggling to survive and make ends meet and just make the best of it. So while that was going on, prior to that, we're gonna get back to the monopoly of things and how the big empires were fighting. Obviously, there was a lot of concern, of course, even with rum that went from sugar to tafia. We're gonna talk about tafia a bit later on, just so we can understand why some big colonies were a bit maybe afraid of rum. We're not really interested in making rum because obviously, let's take for instance Spain. They had brandy, they had Madeira, the French had the cognac. So it wasn't really in anybody's interest to promote a spirit that's fairly new, because why would you endanger your own national spirit? Makes sense. Basically, so how they were fighting about was, at the time you had privateering. So keep in mind, life was very hard, and as life was hard, it's easy to intertwine now the bartender and the barkeep craft into the whole segment of this environment, because at the time, either what you would do is you would hunt or you would fish. So those were the two things you would be doing. So people were fighting hard and hard. Obviously, the wars being on and constantly another nation attacking an island or things like that. A lot of things were uncertain. If a certain nation would conquer an island or an area, and they realized that they had a less chance of staying in that area, basically they would burn everything. They would burn the field, kill the animals and everything. So even if you were local and you hid somewhere, once you get out of that whole situation, you would find yourself in a very tough situation again. Why are we mentioning this? We're mentioning this so this kind of resulted in the birth of privateers. Privateers or buccaneers, we'll define the difference. Buccaneers got this name from buccan. It's the wooden frame where they used to dry the meats that they were hunting, so they were basically huntsmen. And sailors started to see a lot of popularity, a lot of attraction towards not just privateering, but also to pirating or buccaneering, because they were very mistreated on ships. Because why? I mean, everybody know that it's so hard to get a job, so basically you were treated very badly. So a lot of people were getting sick of that, and they were getting that sick they decided to risk their lives and just go into a certain riskier sphere of their life, either buccaneering or pirating, right? Or privateering. So basically, we're just gonna touch base on the terms. Buccaneering and privateering are very connected. Basically, buccaneers at the beginning of their roles were not pirates. Eventually, they went into that sphere. Versus privateers, that meant they were pirates, but they have a license. So basically, they were justified pirates, right? So basically, they were muscle of the sea. Let's put it like that. We got 5 more minutes. I think we're gonna have to extend this class. Okay. So they were basically, yeah.
I got another.
No, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. So they were basically muscle of the sea. So basically, they were used for any kind of ruler that wanted another nation out, or that wanted they wanted more dominance on the sea. They were basically used for that. First of all, they were much cheaper than having an army. So if a privateer dies, hey, you know, it is what it is, right? So it wasn't too big of a loss for the governing bodies. But who was smart could make a big thing out of that. For instance, like Captain Morgan, he became basically the how you call it? He was the number one running person of Jamaica. He was basically the governor of Jamaica at the time, and he was granted that from the governing bodies of England. So what the privateers were doing is basically during Queen Anne's Revenge, there was around 127 letters of privateering issued. So there was a lot of privateers going around, right? So there was a lot of licenses for privateering. It was very important. The people that jumped on privateering the last were the French. After a very hard defeat, they decided that they saw the economic result of actually losing an army versus losing privateers. So to go back, it was a very stormy time. So you can see how like taverns that were at ports, tavern owners. Now you can see everything that they were dealing with, because keep in mind, privateers would land, and if they would not get anything on the sea, they would get on the land. So you had a crew on the ship, and the crew had to be happy. So if you don't get anything on the sea, you know what? You're gonna grab something on the land, and that's when again we go back to the people that were working hard. They were suffering a lot. It was a hard time, right? So basically, on ships, it was a democracy. So the captain would be the main, he would be the president, and then basically everybody else was kind of saying where we're gonna go, what we're gonna do, making supplies. It was an organized presence on ships. Obviously, after the spoils of war or their attack, they would divide. So basically, the boys on the ship would get half what the men would. So it was divided very kind of like in an army sort of way. So it was very crucial, like that everybody was happy, but it was a hierarchy. So to go back to Captain Morgan, because it's very important, Charles II in 1674 named him the governor of Jamaica. As we said, Barbados was big in the level of making rum, but once Barbados kind of like developed, that's when Jamaica started picking up, because like obviously Barbados was a market that has been oversaturated with plantations and workers, and Jamaica was next in line to do so. So after a while, Jamaica was even harsher. So even more people died in Jamaica trying to make the rum culture be big, not just rum culture, but the produce of sugar and everything. So basically, that was the next step into going where we're gonna go. By next class, we're gonna touch base on. I'm gonna have to cut because we have a limit on time. But next class is gonna be how from Jamaica and how that whole development went to William Keith, the governor of New Amsterdam in the mid 17th century. So we're gonna touch that and the first distillery in the New World, and how the gin and the rum kind of went into play, and how important molasses was for America, what molasses did for America. And then in that whole segment of things now that you see from Ottoman to the sugarcane, now that you see how influential the whole thing was, now you're maybe gonna understand the life of a barkeep in a tavern. Keep in mind the situation of the life: no electricity, shortage of water, there was no ice. So keep in mind all of this. So we're gonna touch base on the difficulties that our craft had in the beginning and how it all transited into what we have now. So now hopefully you see a touch of why we created Swizzle Rum Bar and Drinkery, the team and I. So hopefully tune in. I hope tomorrow we're going to do another class and we can have a bit more better information for you. I hope you guys enjoyed.